Welcome to the SVG-TV evening news for today, Tuesday, that should be the 20th of April. I'm Khalil Keita with the details. The United Nations today launched a global appeal fund for St. Vincent and the Grenadines with a target of $29.2 million. The fund will assist with SVG's humanitarian response and early recovery from the devastation of the eruption of the SOUFRIERE volcano. Larissa Pugsley-Kidd tells us more in this report.
The United Nations is mobilizing support from the international community for humanitarian and early recovery support for SVG for at least the next 6 months. The UN Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, Didier Trebok, launched the appeal today at Cabinet Room. Alongside him was Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves and the representatives from other international agencies. Trebok said SVG is facing a humanitarian crisis and they are looking to address the immediate needs of the people displaced as a result of the eruption of the volcano.
Food security and livelihood through different modalities, should it be kits or cash vouchers, shelter and housing, and those three sectors, I would say, are our three immediate priorities.
The UN Resident Coordinator said that health and education will also be addressed, pointing out that SVG is still in a pandemic and a spike in COVID-19 can take place. The recovery of agriculture, which has been largely impacted, will also be looked into, as well as security.
Then six, the restoration of the agriculture. I want to remind that St. Vincent is a country that has a very vivid agricultural sector, so that's a very important area for recovery. Seventh, protection in terms of gender-based violence or child protections who are in shelter or precarious conditions.
The UN has already contributed $2 million to SVG, along with support from other agencies such as UNICEF, PAHO and WHO.
Allocated close to $2 million to support the government in the response, including $1 million approved through the Central Emergency Response Fund, especially for drinking water and hygiene, to initiate the recovery and the rehabilitation. Of course, more will be needed once the whole scope of damages, losses and needs will have been fully assessed.
The UN rep said personnel from the European Union will be deployed to SVG to lend support in the cleanup exercise. Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves thanked the UN for their response to SVG's relief efforts, noting that this will go a long way in assisting the people of SVG affected by the volcano as the country readies itself for the hurricane season.
We can bear it with your help. And one way in which you can help is to support this United Nations Response Global Appeal Fund. You will be helping St. Vincent and the Grenadines in this, its midnight hour of need.
Barbados has also requested assistance from the UN as that country has also been affected by volcanic ash. La SOUFRIERE volcano erupted 12 days ago, and more than 12,000 people are now in shelters, both public and private. A UN team toured the red and orange zones on the windward end last weekend. For SVG-TV News, Larissa Pugsley-Kidd.
And Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves said the damage in the red and orange zones of La SOUFRIERE are estimated to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Addressing the launch of the UN Global Appeal Fund, Prime Minister Gonsalves said they do not have a confirmed figure as initial damage assessments are still being carried out.
The number is going to run into many millions of dollars, and we are not talking about just tens of millions. It's going to be in excess of that, because I've been in this business long enough to give numbers what we may have in respect of the actual damage, because we haven't gotten all of that assessed as yet, and the consequential economic loss and the amount of money for social support and protection, safety net, water, health, and so on and so forth.
The Prime Minister alluded to the World Bank's assessment, which puts assets and other infrastructural damage at more than $385.5 million.
The orange zone, that is the volcanic hazard zones, the total built asset at risk are evaluated at approximately $387.5 million US. In the red zone alone, the replacement value of residential buildings is US $64 million. Non-residential buildings, $106 million US. And infrastructure, which is there, infrastructure at risk, and much of it has been damaged, $83 million US. And then we have to address the economic loss to which I alluded earlier.
PM Gonsalves further noted that it would take a very long time before persons can return to their homes.
Out of the country, which is good agricultural country, good animal husbandry country, good fishing country, and growing tourism spots, it's all gone. It's the ash, the volcanic activity, it's now a relative wasteland. It's desolation that we have to do a lot to recover.
With large amounts of volcanic ash now in St. Vincent and Barbados, Director General of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, Dr. Didacus Jules, is hoping that people can turn ash into cash. During his address at today's launch of the UN Global Appeal Fund, the OECS director said it has been done in other countries and St. Vincent can follow suit.
Ash to cash. And in discussions held with the government of Norway, who have been very responsive, they have pointed us to an experience in the Pacific where ash together with recycled plastic is being used to create bricks for construction. So we think that we are exploring this and in active discussions with them on moving into St. Vincent with the possibility, as well as we've invited the government of Barbados, who have been seriously collaterally impacted by the eruption, to be part of this initiative of moving ash to cash.
The OECS director also noted with concern the increase of plastic bottles coming into SVG as part of the relief efforts. He cautioned against creating an environmental problem with plastic pollution and said it would be better if water can be sent to SVG in large containers.
And the OECS has had several initiatives relating to plastic reduction that we are now going to be rolling out in a much expanded manner in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But we've also been encouraging the member states of the OECS in sending water to St. Vincent to do so by barge. And we have the support of French private entrepreneurs with a barge capable of moving 50 40-foot containers. And we've been using this not only to collect items in containers across the OECS, but also to move water in bulk and moving also water tanks for delivery, thus reducing the tendency for increased inflows of plastic bottled water.
As part of the efforts leading up to the highly anticipated Sustainable Development Movement SDM 2021 Summit, the OECS Commission will host the think tank on April 29th. The inaugural event will support the OECS's Stronger Together campaign, a fundraising initiative created on behalf of the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to aid in relief and recovery efforts due to the ongoing volcanic eruption. Held as part of the OECS's aspiration to fast-track the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, that should be the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union, through disruptions, solid innovations and agility, the free virtual event will also feature a special segment dedicated to raising funds for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Lead scientist monitoring the SOUFRIERE volcano, Dr. Richard Robertson, said a lahar or mud flow signal was recorded around 4 this morning at the station at Bamboo Range, lasting about 30 minutes. He said the mud flow probably took place in one of the valleys on the southeastern side flank of the volcano and explained the dangers of this activity.
That happened during the period was that we got what's called a lahar or mud flow signal at around 4 o'clock this morning. It was recorded at the station in Bamboo Range, which suggests to us that a lahar or mud flow came down the river, one of those rivers on the southeast. It's like it might be Rabaka, And that's why we picked up the signal. The Laha is really like a thick, muddy river. You have a lot of deposits up at the summit, and we'd expect that as rains come, as we get into the rainy season, whatever else happens at the volcano, one of the hazards that's going to become more pronounced and more likely are mud flows. You're going to have flooding of lower areas. It's going to damage houses and probably bridges and things like that. But there was one early this morning.
Professor Robertson said the volcano continues the pattern observed in the last explosion on April 18th, with small, long period and hybrid earthquakes that are not likely to be felt.
Any of the river valleys that you have on the volcano is going to be potentially impacted by lahars, because essentially they're just a river that's come down, as we say in St. Vincent, the river come down. And in this case, when the river come down, the river bring in all the blocks and pieces of vegetation and everything that the volcano has destroyed at the summit and just resting in the ground. When the rain falls, it carries it into the river. So the river has a lot more potential to cause damage because it has a lot more material in it. It's not just water alone. It has a lot more, bits and pieces of things that could push things and do damage. So Laha has a much more dangerous potentially than just simply a swollen river or river in flood. It's a river in flood, but a river in flood that has a lot more material in it. So any of the valleys that drain the volcano, we won't be surprised if you have that happening as we move forward and we move into the rainy season.
The lead monitoring scientist said if the volcanic activities continue on this current path, another explosive eruption can be expected within the next 7 days.
The volcano seems to be trying, in a sense, to grow a dome, and it doesn't succeed because it then has an explosion that gets destroys that dome. We'd expect at some point it might actually succeed, and you may have a dome there. We don't know if this week is the time that it happens, but if it doesn't, well, you're probably going to have an explosion. So activity essentially continues the same, with now us having mud flows. But the gap in between the explosive events and the relatively quiet periods is increasing. So it went from 13 to 40 something to 50 something. So yeah, and it probably will get to 70 and 80. We're not quite sure if there's a rate or special relationship with how fast the gap is increasing, but we know that the gap is increasing. That's why I said there's a potential for it. But I also said that there is also potential that it might not happen, that this time the dome might be successful in being formed, in which case the chances of it capping the system.
Dr. Robertson also noted that 2 rock falls were recorded on Monday with no volcanic tectonic earthquakes or tremors over the last 12 hours.
Likely that as the dome grows, bits and pieces of it fall off, and it generates a signal that we have on a rockfall. That's possibly one of the reasons to get rockfall. A rockfall signal is essentially a seismic signal that's generated when a large mass of a large part, a large rock, a large piece of volcanic material fall off the mountain and move down the mountainside. And as it does that, it generates a vibration that the seismic instruments record. So it's possible to have them anywhere in a volcano that's not necessarily related to dome growth, but the fact that you have in them and you begin to have a few more suggests to us that it probably is another indicator that you probably have the volcano either growing or trying to, well, you have some sort of growth going on at the summit, and that is a result of it, quite apart from the seismic signals that we have.
Meanwhile, the lead monitoring scientist said that a lot of plants, agricultural crops and wildlife have been affected greatly by the explosion and pyroclastic flow of the SOUFRIERE volcano.
Almost total destruction of plant life. There's a lot of ash. There are no trees. If there are any trees, there are stumps of trees. The leaves have been broken down. But then as you go lower down, you might see a few more trees. Most of the lower level, plants and plant life is totally destroyed and covered in ash. But you may see some rare trees every now and then. I suspect they're just really the barks, and they will eventually die. So those are the areas where the forest essentially has been destroyed to a large extent. It will have to be rebuilt. When you move north now from Baleine, in fact, Baleine, last time I saw Baleine, it was fairly, the forest was still there, it was in good condition. If you go from Baleine all the way around to Fancy and then you're coming back south, I mean, the forest is still largely intact as you get to the lower end, as you get outside from the crater itself. And it's only when you start coming back.
Though he doesn't encourage farmers to start replanting their crops as yet, Professor Robertson said after things settle down with the volcano, the ash will have a great impact on the soil and agriculture in the country.
The thing I would say is that often, things rebuild, the land rebuilds itself very fast. Really what it needs is a good rainy season, and it changes rapidly. So I suspect that a lot would change after the rainy season has passed this year, and that the land itself and the ability to rehabilitate the land would be significantly improved once you start getting some rain. So I mean, I'm very positive about the effect that the ash would have. It actually, in the end, the ash, although it's a nuisance now and it's very thick, the ash is going to have a positive effect in terms of the agriculture in St. Vincent, because the minerals that you have, they do, I mean, that's the fact that we have great land for agriculture and conditions, yes, right, is partly to do with the volcanic materials. So I think in the end it will be very positive, but I think moving in that direction where you research it and find out that's a good idea.
The volcano alert level remains at red. The National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, said 88 shelters housing 6,208 persons have been activated, with 6,567 persons occupying private homes accounted for. So far, 13,303 persons have been displaced. Since the volcano erupted explosively on April 9th, members of the public have been battling the ashfall deposited across the island. Our news team spoke with several persons in capital Kingstown on what it's like to experience the latest eruption of the volcano, which has been sleeping for over 42 years.
Well, for me, I was home, but I didn't feel no way because I experienced it already. Okay. I have an experience in 1979. Oh, this one is more horrible, more ash, and everything.
I was at work, right? I was surprised, honestly, because they're saying that it was not going to blow, but common sense. I was not afraid. I was just excited to see exactly what all these stories and these stuff were about. I don't like how I have eczema, so it kind of irritates my skin, so I'm not outside as often. Okay.
Well, for a person who born 1979, it was my first experience of the suffering. I was a bit frightened. My daughters were frightened with a bit of tears in the eye, but then I comfort them. As an asthma case, sometimes my chest gets tight, but then I try to stay indoor most of the time.
Well, in my era, I mean, it's just ash really affected me. No, I wasn't scared. It was just surprising that the ash that reached so far. As I was told, in 1979, the ash didn't spread so far. As you can see, this is ash in tongue. Very difficult to walk here in this.
Well, I didn't scared, because I experienced it 79 and I didn't think it bad. But they say if one more like this will come again, I tell you. The worst part is when I get up with the ashes Saturday. Right now, everything gone back down. Me let them cover down, but I keep washing them off.
Yes, real. Devastate the country, man. It cut me crops them too. Well, some of my crop was affected more than some. Like the sweet pepper and the plantain and the dashi real hit. The limb them, majority limb them born off. Like if just like somebody wants to spray them. First I ever see that in my life, whole entire life.
And as the SOUFRIERE volcano continues to erupt explosively, Vincentians, particularly those from the red zone communities, are waiting anxiously for the light at the end of the tunnel. Until then, the battle with ash and other fallout from the eruption continues. Vincentians here at home and abroad woke up to the news this morning of the passing of a legal giant, PARNEL Campbell QC, affectionately known as PR. An outpouring of tributes flooded social media and the airwaves for the prominent Queen's Counsel. In a telephone interview with SVG-TV News, Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves shared his memories of Campbell, which he said began during his time at the boys' grammar school, where Campbell was 2 years ahead of him. PM Gonsalves said Campbell was an exceptional all-rounded student and a great cricketer during his school days. Later, the two would stand side by side during the general elections of 1979 on the ticket of the United People's Movement, before parting ways to join different political parties. While the two would be fierce rivals in years to come, often with opposing views, Prime Minister Gonsalves said they maintained a strong friendship which grew after Campbell left the political arena. Prime Minister Gonsalves continued his glowing tributes to Campbell QC, noting that he was a tremendously successful reforming Attorney General, a prodigious worker and excellent organizer who was a pillar in the New Democratic Party and part of its success in the earlier years. He added that Campbell QC was a good parliamentary representative who modernized the spiritual Baptist faith and enhanced the organization.
The simple truth is this, is that a towering intellect, legal scholar, and patriot has left us. He was at one time a political colleague, then we became political rivals, but always we had friendship. He is a wonderful father and husband, and there's nobody since independence, or indeed before, who has educated the public on the law as much as PARNEL Campbell. This morning, very early, when I found out, I couldn't go back and sleep at all. I mean, I feel a personal loss. He is a wonderful human being, and the state would accord him an official funeral. I've spoken to his widow, Julie. They're going through a difficult time. And on behalf of the government and people of St. Vincent and Grenadines, I express sincerest condolences to the family and friends of PARNEL Campbell. It came home close to me. He's a towering patriot, no question about it, and he made an immense contribution to the development of this country in many, many ways, in law, in politics, in religion, in social activity, in the communities. Man who came from humble beginnings and remained humble throughout his life. Man of culture, the arts, a tremendous all-round personality.
Leader of the opposition New Democratic Party, Dr. Godwin, Friday also reminisced on his interactions with Campbell QC and detailed how he assisted him during his early years practicing law in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
I got to know him a lot better once I had become involved in the politics here as a candidate, and through practicing the law here in St. Vincent, he was there, presented me for my call to the bar, assisted me, and he was always a good resource to turn to whenever you needed guidance or a second opinion here and there, That was important to me because I was new here, and he, recognized that I needed that sort of support, and he provided it. So I've always had a special thank you and appreciation to him for that. And his service for explaining the law to people, many people, they would tell you, well, Campbell said this and Campbell said that. As a lawyer, we had to confront that every day in our practice. So he's done human service to his country, and in this time of grief, we all extend our deepest condolences to his family.
The late Parnell P.R. Campbell lived an exemplary life. He was an educator, lawyer, politician, spiritual man, husband, father, and friend. The stalwart Vincentian left behind a firm legacy that will keep his name on the lips of Vincentians for years to come. A number of his colleagues and friends shared their most fond memories of the late P.R. Campbell, from meeting him in the classroom at the grammar school, where he was a teacher, to sitting alongside him at university or contesting a general election, and alongside him and working with him, P.R. Campbell was an exceptional man. His legal colleagues Rene Batiste and Kay Bacchus Batiste remember being in PR's photography class in 1969 and remembered him as one of the first graduates in the Faculty of Law at the Cave Hill campus over 50 years ago. Dr. Richard Byron Cox also shared his memories of Campbell.
And the poor who once said that to err is human and to forgive is divine. Let us understand that Mr. Campbell was just a man like any other man. However, he was a great man. He was a man who did a lot of wonderful things for our country. The thing about Pierre Campbell, Mr. Campbell had a very wonderful sense of humor. Most people don't know this, and he would tell you these funny jokes. You'll be talking to him about something, and he would always be able to bring out some experience, some funny experience, you know, which was a lesson in itself. In other words, he was a man of parables in that sense, in that he would always be able to relate what you were saying to him to something that actually happened in life.
People used to be fascinated by the fact that they would see us walking in the street in the day, and then he goes to his political meeting and I go to mine. Well, that could be all. And we had that what we call political rivals with respect, because we understand the nature of politics and political science, and we live in this community, we want to be in this community. He is also a person who was very well organized. He believed in structure. He believed in good order. While a man of high intellect and scholarship, he was tolerant and understood when people made mistakes. But he always had, because he's a teacher at heart, you know, to me he's always a teacher, and so he said he's going to do this law on you, and he keeps very meticulous records. Must be all taped, all documented, all indexed and everything. And he said to me one time, I said, do you get sponsorship for this program? He said, no, not really. It's my sacrifice, my labor of love, and I'm hoping that when I'm gone, that the bar will be able to continue the program. Well, here we are, we have a very large bar, and I'm hoping that the many scholars in the bar will be able to take up that challenge.
I am really sad that it had to come to at this time, because we're going through a real, not only economic crisis, but the whole eruption of the SOUFRIERE and COVID, and then it's this on top of it. And so we have lost a lot this year, the legal profession, but PARNEL is one of the legal luminaries that will stand out for me.
As news of PR's passing spread across the region, Batiste read some of the tributes that came in from colleagues and friends.
I have a few messages from colleagues overseas, and I would just like to read them. The president of the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations, Mr. Ruggles Ferguson of Grenada. Oh, sorry to hear, Rennie, apart from being a solid lawyer, PARNEL was a great human being, fair, humble, and easygoing. He has made a significant contribution to public legal education with one of the longest-running TV programs in St. Vincent, possibly the Caribbean. Simplifying the law for the man in the street, he has cemented his legacy. This is from Dr. Jacqueline Little, James Little. And she said, the former Attorney General was a great man. He was a wonderful father, husband, and a true Vincentian icon. He was also my dad. The brilliant Dr. Campbell Chambers has been my best friend since we were 9 years old, and today I hurt for her and cry with her. I will miss him so much. That was from Jackie. IPP said, IPP Thaddeus St. Lucia, condolences to his family, indeed the SVG bar, may he rest in peace. And the president now of the OECS bar, so this is a great loss of the St. Lucia bar. What a loss that we have suffered from a member of the bench overseas. And she said, I woke up to the sad news of the passing of Pierre Campbell. I know the situation is difficult at this time in SVG. I also do not know what are the wishes of QC, but if there will be a special sitting, could it be streamed or be on Zoom? I'm certain many persons outside of SVG would love to participate. The bar has lost a distinguished legal luminary. May he rest in peace.
PARNEL Campbell would have lived a full life with one of the longest-running television shows in the Caribbean, The Law and You, broadcasted every week here on SVG-TV. He has passed, leaving behind just under 1,000 episodes. May he rest in peace. With students across St. Vincent and the Grenadines still learning remotely or through online classes, the learning losses are piling up because of the multiple challenges caused by the dengue fever outbreak, the coronavirus, and now the eruption of the SOUFRIERE volcano. On NBC Radio this morning, Minister of Education Curtis King said the government of SVG is working on ways to limit the negative impact of these challenges on the education system.
And the Ministry of Education is charged with that responsibility to come up with programs, proposals to deal with the issue. We have been doing so. We have had several meetings. These meetings basically have looked at two major issues. That of how we can assist persons psychosocially and what we can do to help to recover some of our academic loss in terms of instruction and so on. Because I need to remind persons that all of our schools basically are out of commission.
King said that the Ministry of Education is trying to work out a suitable solution for students who may not be able to do this year's Caribbean Primary Examination, or CPEA.
Issues relating to, I come back to the CPA. Again, we would have discussions with all concerned so that we could work out something that persons would not say that somehow the Ministry of Education is engaged in any sort of discrimination. I mean, that is a national issue that is very sensitive because, as we know, under our system, the first 500 students, the top 500 students, they are basically offered places based on their choice, their choices. And as such, without the exams, if that is going to be the case, then we must have some workable solution that would be accepted by most persons. I say most persons because I don't think everybody is going to accept whatever formula we arrived at.
The Education Minister also noted that today officials from his ministry met virtually with representatives of the Caribbean Examinations Council to work out an agreement on this year's exams. He noted that the students are now faced with a number of challenges and are not in a position to do any exams at this time.
Several discussions with CXC. We have ultimately, and this as a region, postponed those exams to at least a month later, and some other issues relating to students' level of comfort. That is to say, you release the questions to the students 5 weeks in advance of the exams and so on and so on. But in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that package that was offered by CXC has to be reevaluated, because at the time the package was offered, not just for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but to the entire region, the situation was not that bleak in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So as such, we have been engaging CXC in discussions as to how best we can resolve this so that our students would not be at a further disadvantage.
Meanwhile, the Ministry of Education recently received an additional 6,000 tablets, which will be distributed to primary school students from grade K up to grade 5 who have not yet received a device to engage in e-learning. The Minister of Education said the additional tablets will allow for greater success of the ministry's online learning program.
Approaching it step by step. We want to first engage those students in the shelter because they are the ones with immediate needs, right? And then we move to the other levels. Of course, we have to continue to find ways of having the appropriate content in these digital programs, because you would recognize that online teaching, as useful as it is, And I keep making the point, it is not the most, well, let me put it this way, it cannot replace face-to-face instruction. And therefore, we have to do all that we can to make sure that the experience is one that is rewarding to the students. And of course, the teachers involved, but of course, more so the students.